What's your problem? What's your solution? This is an interview series about making the world a better place. Throughout his impressive career, Richard Branson has used business efforts to solve problems and to create better or more fun experiences for his customers. With that combined focus on solutions and entertainment, he is now concentrating on clean energy, sustainable food, and much more to address the challenge of climate change. For Richard Branson, good and innovative business is the answer to almost every problem. Welcome to Kamp Solutions. From your long business career, you've seen setbacks and success. What have you learned that tells you that we can solve the problem of climate change?
Yeah, well, my philosophy in life is never to give up and to keep battling until you ultimately succeed.
But there are certain Virgin projects. I seem to remember Virgin Cola one day, and I guess we don't miss that now. But you know, you gave up on that one. So apparently you need to know when you need to stop.
Well, a business is slightly different than the destruction of the world. Yeah. Well, look, I will try things and work very hard to make them succeed. And you know, if it's obvious that Coca-Cola is going to put us out of business, which they did, then we'll have to move on and fight other battles. But with climate change, we can't afford to do that. We all of us. I mean, anybody who's in a position to make a difference must make a difference. And you know, you're doing so by making this documentary. I'm doing so to try to help educate companies who are not doing anything about climate change at the moment to actually start doing something about it and show them how it can be done.
Global warming, climate change is mostly related to the wrong kind of business. Can business also solve this problem?
I think business has to solve the problem. I mean, governments need to lay the rules, and then it's up to business people to use their entrepreneurial skills to come up with the answers, and then to invest and make sure that you know, we are carbon neutral by 2050.
How do we shift the debate into doing the right things?
I feel quite strongly that there is a relatively simple way of addressing climate change. So a carbon tax is the way that most people say, you know, that's the only way to solve the world's problems. The problem about a carbon tax is that it's unpopular with the public because it means higher fuel prices. It's unpopular with companies because it's going to be taking a lot of money from the companies, and therefore it's unpopular with governments. And Australia, that imposed a carbon tax, the government fell, and the new government then got rid of the carbon tax. My simple suggestion is that the governments introduce a clean energy dividend instead of a carbon tax. But the main difference will be that 100% of that money raised won't just go into general government coffers. It'll be used by the companies that have to pay that tax to invest in clean energy. If a number of countries could implement this, I think we'd very rapidly get on top of the problem. What would happen would be that very quickly fuel prices of clean energy would come down. That would bring the fuel prices of dirty energy down. So the public would be happy because they'd be paying less money out. The companies would be happy because they can actually invest in clean energy. They've got a chance of getting their money back plus dividends. And therefore the government should be happy.
How would it work? Where would that money go? Does it stay under the control of the company that pays into the...
Exactly. So the government would approve, you know, say, you know, 1 million different projects in the world. I mean, it could be a lot more than that. But you know, so there would be government-approved projects for that money to be invested in, and then the companies themselves would decide which of those approved projects they could invest the money in. And you know, so it could be, I mean, simplistically, it could be solar, it could be wind, it could be battery power, it could be clean energy for airlines, it could be a whole range of different areas. And the people who want that investment, they will go to government and they will show how they can benefit the world by by growing.
There are initiatives like B Corporation that are voluntary, so companies sign up for that and say, well, we commit to certain additional values as a corporation, and we want to do that.
It's a good idea, but it doesn't work. What we're talking about is a massive global problem, which needs, billions of money to be invested in clean energy.
But you mentioned you're talking to several governments. Could it happen that only, a group of governments will start with this initiative?
Yeah, unlike the carbon tax, I don't think, the reason that people have always been against carbon taxes, there's a lot of reasons, but one reason is it'll put us at a competitive disadvantage to the countries that are not implementing a carbon tax. On this occasion, because the companies have the right to invest that money into new businesses, new clean energy businesses, and because they can actually make money from that, I don't think it will put them at a disadvantage to countries that haven't actually implemented it. And I think the first countries that decide to do this, the best projects in the world will be available to them, the most profitable projects.
But is there no competitive disadvantage if, say, only a handful of European countries do this and the United States doesn't participate?
The exciting thing about this is that the amount of money, let's just say take Europe, the amount of money that they could generate from a climate change dividend is enormous. More actually, I think, than the clean energy sector needs. And so the speed of introduction of clean energy will be dramatically fast.
So you approach climate change, as you have done many ventures in your life, in a creative way. So you would, for instance, support Formula E, which is electric car racing. Now, can you explain how that supports climate change? Some people will say, well, car racing, how can that be relevant, right?
I think that a lot of new technologies come about from motor racing. If you take that sector, before climate change was an issue, the Grand Prix, they were trying to make sure that cars got better and better, faster and faster, more and more cutting edge, more and more fuel efficient, and so on. By investing in Formula E, it's fun, it's entertaining for people, but it's also clean, and it's run. The cars are run by batteries, and since Formula E started, it's gone from having to change a battery halfway through to having batteries that last the whole length of the journey, and the amount of speed that people are managing to get from batteries has gone up enormously. So I think where you've got people competing to try to come up with the best technology, it can only ultimately benefit the clean energy revolution.
How does that apply to space tourism?
So Virgin Orbit, which is a sister company to Virgin Galactic, we're putting 2,000 satellites around the Earth with a company called OneWeb. And those satellites can, apart from connecting the 5 billion people who are not connected, they can also monitor illegal fishing. They can monitor rainforests that are being cut down. They can monitor methane leaks anywhere in the world, and then we can go to the companies and tell them that that they have an issue and that they need to sort it out. I think space can play a good positive role in addressing climate change.
What is the relationship between nature and technology?
There's a whole lot of things that we've got to consider doing. Let's just take. So I don't know. 5 years ago, I just experimented by cutting out beef and found I didn't miss it. So Memphis Meats is a company that we've invested in, which literally grows the meat from a little bit of meat from a cow. Keeping the cow alive, they then take that and they can just grow it into large amounts of meat. I've done fun things on Necker where everybody thinks they're eating a burger. They say it's the most delicious burger they've ever eaten, but it's really healthy vegetarian food. If we can switch a lot of people into not eating as much meat as they currently are, that will make a big difference.
how can we make that fun? Because it's probably the biggest thing that any one person can do. Not everybody flies or often, but people all eat every day. So if you change diets, that is the biggest thing we can do for global warming. But that's a mindset that needs to change.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I mentioned beef rather than saying, immediately go vegetarian is I just think that it turns off too many people if you actually start saying, you should be a vegetarian. Whereas if you actually say to somebody, why don't you just experiment by cutting out beef? Yeah, I mean, it's not such a difficult thing for people to do. There are plenty of alternatives.
You can still have bacon and eggs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then in time, you may well decide to go further. But I think where it can become fun is actually with these alternative sources of clean foods. I may be wrong, but my instinct is that 30 years from now, killing animals will be a thing of the past. And that will be, I think, great from the animal's point of view. But it will also be very, very good from a climate change point of view.
So the conversation on climate change is so often very dark and negative. At the same time, it can be possibly one of the biggest opportunities ever to create the very world that people like you have been fighting for decades. So why is it so negative?
I think that the people who are campaigning on climate change need to put a positive spin on it and not be too negative and not be too gloomy in order that people don't give up and just say, well, it's beyond me. There's no way I can do anything about it. What I think people need to try to do is, first of all, get their own houses in order. At our home on Necker Island, we look at every aspect. So, whether it's no beef, whether it's, LED lights for the tennis courts, whether it's no single-use plastic. These are fun things to do, but they save a lot of money as well.
Yes.
And so the reason I'm hopeful about us getting on top of the climate change issue is that there are answers to these problems. And we're now working on trying to create the whole Caribbean as a climate-friendly zone, obviously using Necker as an example of how it can be done.
The example of Necker Island is interesting in the sense that you've been here for a long time already, and so the island has been, under your control, if you like, for some time.
So we should have done it sooner. You're absolutely right.
No. What did change? What did change?
I'm guilty as charged in that one. We should have.
Well, I'm not charging you, but I want to know because people can learn from this.
We should have done it earlier, and it's something which I have been talking about for a long time. The technologies have definitely stepped forward and are much better today than they were 5 years ago. But yeah, we should have done it 5 years ago.
The point is not so much that you should have, but what I'm interested in is that doesn't apply to Necker Island only. It applies to many other situations.
You're 100% right, but I think people do need to see good examples.
Yes. What is your favorite example in terms of technology from what you're seeing now to address climate change?
I think the breakthroughs on battery technology is very exciting. If you've got wind 24 hours a day and then it dies for a while, you need these really good quality batteries to then. But the exciting thing is that every single one of these sectors, wind, solar, batteries, the price is coming down. Let's say an average of 10% a year. It's the quality of delivery is going up by maybe 10% a year. So we launched something called the Virgin Earth Prize, which is a $25 million prize to see if there was anybody out there that could bring enough carbon out of the Earth's atmosphere, which was basically just an idea of my wife. She just one day said, there must be, out of 6 billion people in the world, somebody bright enough to be able to work out a way of extracting the carbon out of the atmosphere. That prize has been going for about 10 years now. And at the moment, there have been good breakthroughs with some of these companies. At the moment, the cost effectiveness of it is quite a long way off.
So the technologies you select are still too expensive?
It's really expensive, yeah.
Yes.
At the moment.
People talk about one of the big problems of climate change is that India and China, the very big countries with big populations, adopting our Western lifestyle. But couldn't they leapfrog as well?
Well, I think, China in particular is doing a lot. They are sadly still building new coal power stations, and they need to stop. but but they've got the land mass to turn China into a completely clean country. The smog from places like Beijing is still unbearable, and politically it's unacceptable. And I think the politicians realise that, and so I think a lot of the clean energy breakthroughs will come from China, and were China to introduce a clean energy dividend and it was to be spent in that way, in coming up with clean energy, it could be a real revolution. India, it has a wonderful opportunity because a lot of people weren't even on the grid. Setting up local solar and wind areas is cost effective and something that a lot of people in India are now working on.
You talk with climate change activists, I'm sure you do. They keep saying there's a lot of money to be made for entrepreneurs when we do all these things. And while we're doing it, we're solving the problem as well. The activists, don't they see that? Or about
15 years ago, a number of us invested in clean energy, and we all lost quite a lot of money in those days. And that, I think, because so many people got burned, it frightened people off. People are coming back and are beginning to invest now. But to get the billions and billions, I think we need government intervention to make sure that the billions go into clean energy.
What is the initial response you're getting from governments when you propose your clean energy dividend?
Very positive. We talked to Tim Flannery, who wrote the wonderful book, The Weathermakers, and he was very excited about the idea. And he's talked to the leader of the opposition about it. There's an election taking place in 6 weeks. And I mean, it's going to be almost impossible to bring a carbon tax back into Australia after what happened last time. But a new approach, like the clean energy dividend, he feels could have some traction.
Could you convince China to adopt it?
I don't, it's not a difficult thing to convince people. I mean, it's, there's no real downsides to it. I mean, that's, and that's where, my entrepreneurial brain is trying to come up with ways of solving problems that, in an entrepreneurial way, that will benefit the public, which will benefit companies, which will benefit the globe.
If you look back, what is your biggest business success?
Being quite brave and going from running what was the most successful independent record company in the world to starting an airline. It was the airline that really put the Virgin brand on the map on a global basis, and that was 35 years ago. We had one plane, nobody thought we'd survive the year. Pan Am had 250, they disappeared. We had one plane, TWA had 250, they disappeared. Air Florida disappeared. British Caledonian disappeared. Laker disappeared. Fortunately, at the end of 12 months, people loved it, and we ended up getting another 2 second-hand 747s. Having that global recognition on a brand has meant that I can now, pick up the phone to pretty well anybody in the world and get through.
What was your most successful failure?
I think any failure has been a learning exercise. I think what I learned by, for instance, the Virgin Cola failure, was that if you're going to set up a competitor to somebody, you've got to be a lot better than them. So at the same time that Coke were trying to drive Virgin Cola out of business, BA were trying to drive Virgin Atlantic out of business.
Yes.
Virgin Atlantic was palpably better than British Airways, and therefore it survived. Whereas with Virgin Cola, it was just a cola.
But to that point of airline travel, don't you think that the world getting together through air travel and people meeting people leads to exchanges of ideas? That's helpful. We should not stop meeting each other, shouldn't we?
Obviously, I agree. And I mean, as batteries become more efficient, it is possible that that we could have planes flying across the Atlantic all battery powered. They need to go a bit further than they are at the moment, but that's not beyond the realms of possibility.
What do you try to teach your grandchildren? Do you want them to be entrepreneurs?
Do I want my grandchildren to be entrepreneurs? I certainly wouldn't be unhappy if they became entrepreneurs. I think, what is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur is simply somebody that comes up with an idea to improve other people's lives better, and that's all an entrepreneur is. So if my grandkids come up with an idea that's going to make other people's lives better, I'd be delighted. Again, I'm a bit biased, but I do think if anyone can save the world, it is entrepreneurs.
You have done a lot of, created a lot of business based on, I suppose, intuition, quick thinking. You're also a chess player. What do you learn from chess when you run your business?
I play chess in roughly the same way that I run my businesses, in a very instinctive manner, very quick decision making. Can get me into trouble on the chessboard.
So, what's your problem?
I think that the problem is just that lack of urgency.
What's your solution?
My personal solution would be to introduce a clean energy dividend on dirty fuel. But the difference between this clean energy dividend and a carbon tax would be that all the money would be invested by the company that's paying that dividend into clean energy, so into clean energy initiatives anywhere in the world. And I think if that happened, we would soon get on top of the world's problems and soon be able to whip climate change.
Have you become the man you wanted to be?
I still think there's a lot more to do, and I enjoy life enormously. So, will not do anything, to depart this world sooner than I have to. I hope that, some of my legacy can live on, but obviously in the end, it basically lives on through your children and your family, and what they've learned from you, and whether they can then continue to deliver what you're trying to do.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck.
We're leaving Necker Island, and we know that Richard Branson's commitment to using enterprise to solving problems is as strong as ever. His leadership is inspiring, and with similar shared focus worldwide, reversing global warming is only a matter of time. This was Kamp Solutions. See you next time.